It started with a storm, not the kind that shakes trees or floods streets, but the kind that arrives quietly, like a whisper curling beneath the ribs before it turns into a scream. It was one of those nights in Detroit where the wind didn't just blow, it howled like it was mourning something lost. The kind of night where even the city lights seemed tired, flickering under the weight of their own silence. Jared hadn't planned on being home that night. He rarely was. The peeling walls of his apartment were too familiar, too still, too much like a mirror. But that evening, the delivery gig was slow, and the engine of his rusted-out Hyundai gave up just as he reached the edge of 8 Mile. So he walked, hands buried deep in his hoodie pocket, collar raised against the rain, trying not to think about the fact that the heating had been out for 3 days and his last paycheck had vanished into his sister's asthma medication. He wasn't bitter. Life had taught him early not to expect fairness. It wasn't about getting what you deserved, it was about enduring what you didn't. That's why when he saw the girl, barefoot, soaked to the bone, standing beneath the overhang of a closed gas station like she was waiting for the world to notice her, he didn't keep walking, even though every part of him wanted to. She didn't look like she belonged there. Her coat was expensive. Real wool. Her nails were clean. And her face, pale and tight, like someone trying hard not to fall apart, looked like it had never tasted the kind of hunger Jared knew by name. She wasn't from this side of the city. She didn't need to be out here, shivering in the dark. So he slowed. He looked once, then again, because something about her eyes struck a chord he couldn't quite name. She wasn't crying. But she had the kind of look people wear right before they do. Like her whole body was holding its breath. "You good?" His voice came out quieter than he meant it to. Almost embarrassed. Like he already knew she'd wave him off, say she was fine, tell him to mind his business. But she didn't. She didn't say anything at all. Not at first. She just looked at him with eyes that were too wide, too alert, like she'd just remembered she was in a body and the world had corners. Then, finally, she said, "I missed the train." Her voice didn't match the street. It was soft, polished, like music trapped under glass. She spoke like someone who was used to being listened to. Not in a demanding way, but in the way people with money forget is a luxury. Jared glanced down the street. The last train had left over an hour ago. He knew because he'd tried to catch it himself. "There's no more tonight," he said. "And the buses are done after 11. She nodded, but it was the kind of nod people give when they don't know what else to do with their neck. He hesitated. He could feel the rain starting to soak through his sleeves. Could feel the discomfort building, hers, his, the world's. And something in him rebelled at the thought of leaving her there. Not because she was pretty, though she was, in the way that felt accidental, like beauty she hadn't asked for, but because she looked like she didn't know how to be alone here. "You got somewhere to go?" he asked. She looked away. And that was the first moment he knew, really knew, that something wasn't right. "No," she whispered. No explanation. No apology. Just that one word, trembling in the space between them like a secret begging not to be told. He didn't answer right away. He wasn't stupid. You don't survive in this part of the city by being soft. But she didn't look dangerous. She looked displaced. Like a piano key stuck between notes. So he made a choice. "You can come to my place. Just for the night. It's not much, but it's warm. Mostly." She blinked. Once. Twice. And for a second, he saw fear flicker behind her eyes like a pilot light trying to catch flame. "I don't know you." "I know." He shrugged. "And you don't have to. But standing here's not gonna make the night go any faster." He thought she'd say no. Part of him hoped she would. He wasn't ready for what this might mean, for the stories it might awaken in both of them. But instead, she nodded. Soft. Grateful. Scared. "My name's Jared," he said as they started walking. She hesitated, then said, "Callie." No last name. And he didn't ask for one. The apartment was 3 blocks away, past a liquor store with metal bars over the windows and a broken streetlight that buzzed like a bad memory. When they reached his building, she hesitated again at the threshold, like stepping inside would make something real she wasn't ready to admit. He opened the door for her anyway. Inside, the place smelled like old coffee and laundry detergent that had lost its will to clean. There was no couch, just a mattress on the floor, a cracked table, and a space heater that whined when you asked too much of it. "It's not a palace," he said, not looking at her as he pulled an extra hoodie from the pile in the corner and handed it over. "But it's dry." She took it, slipped it over her damp clothes. Her fingers trembled, and he wondered for a moment if it was from the cold or something deeper. "You want tea or something?" he asked. She nodded again. Still no words. So he made some. They sat in silence for a long time. Just the sound of rain tapping on the single-pane window and the heater humming like a tired dog. He didn't press her. Something about her silence felt sacred. Like speaking too soon would shatter whatever fragile truth was hanging between them. Finally, after what felt like forever, she spoke. "My dad thinks I'm in Boston." He looked up. "That where you're supposed to be?" She shook her head. "It's where I told him I was going. For school." Jared waited. She didn't continue. "I'm guessing you didn't go." She didn't answer. Just stared into the tea like it held answers she'd spent too long avoiding. He didn't push. Instead, he said, "I never went either. Couldn't afford it. Guess that's the difference between you and me." She looked up then. And what he saw in her eyes wasn't judgment. It wasn't pity. It was something else. Something raw. Like she was holding a truth that didn't fit in her mouth. "You're wrong," she said softly. "That's not the difference." And then she looked away. That night, she slept on his mattress. He took the floor. He didn't touch her. Didn't ask anything more. But as he lay there, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the rain, he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever story she carried, it wasn't just about running away. It was about not being seen. And for the first time in a long time, Jared wondered what it would feel like to be the place someone finally came home to. Jared woke up before the sun. It wasn't the light that stirred him, it was the quiet. The kind of silence that pressed against the walls and whispered that something had shifted, even if the room looked the same. He blinked against the dimness, adjusting to the blue haze of morning that slipped through the curtainless window. Callie was still there. Curled on the mattress like a question with no answer, her long hair spread across his old hoodie like it belonged there. Her breathing was slow, fragile. She didn't look like a girl who'd spent the night on a stranger's floor. She looked like someone trying to disappear and almost succeeding. For a moment, Jared just watched her. Not in a creepy way, he didn't want anything from her. But there was something about the way she slept, like every part of her body was bracing for bad news. Even in dreams, she didn't look at peace. He stood slowly, careful not to wake her, and moved toward the tiny kitchen area. The faucet leaked and the stove clicked twice before lighting. Still, he managed to make coffee. Cheap, bitter, strong. It was all he had. When she stirred, it was sudden. She sat up fast, like she'd forgotten where she was. Panic flared in her eyes for half a second before recognition softened her face. "You're still here," she said, voice rough. "Didn't have anywhere else to be." He held out a chipped mug. "Coffee." She took it with both hands, and for a moment their fingers brushed. It wasn't romantic, it was electric in a different way. Like a small jolt of reality. They sipped in silence. The heater clicked on again, stuttering like it might give up any second. Jared leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You wanna tell me what really happened?" Callie looked down at the mug. Her thumbs moved around the rim like she was trying to summon courage from ceramic. "I lied," she said finally. "About the train." He didn't flinch. He already knew. "I wasn't trying to get anywhere. I just couldn't go back home." "Why?" She hesitated. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because saying it out loud made it real. My dad wanted me to marry someone. Someone from his company. Said it would protect the family's interests. I guess that's what love means to people like him. Business mergers. Jared blinked, unsure if he'd heard right. Marriage? At her age? You ran away from all that? She nodded. I didn't even pack a bag. Just walked out in the middle of dinner and kept walking until I couldn't feel my face. I thought it would be romantic. In a way. Like something out of a movie. But then it got cold. And dark. And I realized I had nowhere to go. Jared exhaled through his nose. So you landed here. I didn't mean to, she said, quick. I didn't mean to drag anyone else into it. You didn't. He paused. I chose to open the door. She looked at him then. Really looked. And whatever she saw seemed to soften something behind her ribs. Thank you. 2 simple words. But they landed heavy. He shrugged, like it didn't matter. But it did. More than he'd admit. What are you gonna do now? She laughed, a dry, humorless sound. I have no idea. My credit cards are all frozen. My phone's probably blowing up with threats from my father's assistant. I've never been alone before. Not really. Jared sipped his coffee, watching her. Then maybe it's time you learn. She raised an eyebrow. Is that your version of a pep talk? He smiled. No. It's just the truth. And for some reason, that made her smile too. Later that morning, Jared offered her an old denim jacket and a pair of sweatpants that didn't quite fit, but she took them without complaint. They walked to the corner store together, side by side, passing people who didn't know her face and wouldn't ask questions. In the fluorescent aisle filled with instant noodles and dented cans, she looked out of place, and yet somehow, not. She picked a small pack of crackers and a bottle of water. You sure this is okay? I've got just enough, Jared said, pulling crumpled bills from his pocket. Don't worry. But she did worry. He could see it. She wasn't used to counting dollars. She was used to contracts and chauffeurs. But not this. Not real life. They sat on a bench outside the store, the sun just starting to cut through the morning chill. She ate in silence, slowly, thoughtfully. Then she said, I don't want to go back. He turned to her. Then don't. But where would I go? What would I do? You start small, he said. 1 step. 1 hour. 1 honest thing at a time. She looked at him for a long beat, eyes wide and unreadable. You talk like you've done this before. He looked out across the street, where a man was arguing with a parking meter and a kid chased pigeons in tattered shoes. I've had practice. She didn't respond right away. But something in her settled. Like maybe, for the first time, the chaos in her head wasn't as loud. And as the wind blew past them, lifting strands of her hair and carrying the scent of cheap coffee and morning asphalt, Jared knew something had shifted. Not just for her. For both of them. The third day began like the end of a song no one wanted to finish. Too quiet, too unsure of where it was going. Callie was sitting on the floor by the window, knees pulled to her chest, eyes tracing the pattern of people passing below. Jared didn't speak. He just watched her from the kitchen, pretending to be busy with toast he wasn't really planning to eat. She looked different already. Not in a physical sense. She still had the same clear skin, the same graceful posture that gave her away as someone raised behind gates. But something inside her was loosening. There was less tension in her shoulders, fewer glances over her shoulder like the world was waiting to reclaim her. Still, he knew it couldn't last. This wasn't a life she was built for. Not permanently. Hey, he said, finally breaking the silence. I've got a shift today. You'll be all right here. She turned toward him, nodding. I'm not made of glass. Didn't say you were. He paused. You sure you don't want to call someone? A flicker of panic darted through her expression, just for a second, before she masked it. I told you. There's no one I trust to call. He accepted that. Not because he fully believed her, but because pushing would only build another wall between them, and she had enough of those already. He slipped on his jacket, picked up his keys, and hesitated by the door. If anyone knocks, don't open. And keep the heater on low, it's old and kinda moody. She gave him a small salute. Yes, sir. He rolled his eyes, but smiled. Then left. Jared's job wasn't glamorous. He worked the backroom of a thrift store, sorting donations, pricing them, putting things on racks while pretending not to overhear the stories people told at checkout. It didn't pay much, but it was honest. And it let him disappear. But not today. Today, his mind kept drifting back to the girl in his apartment. He'd done something risky. Taken in a stranger. A rich one. A runaway. And now, his world, which had always been quiet, small, predictable, felt like it was vibrating at a different frequency. Like something was building beneath the surface. You good? His coworker asked at one point, eyeing him as he fumbled with a stack of shirts. Yeah. Just tired. He wasn't tired. He was restless. By the time his shift ended, the sky had turned the color of rust, and the air held that late summer humidity that clung to skin like guilt. He walked home fast, heart pounding for reasons he didn't want to name. What if she was gone? What if she'd left without a word, like a dream dissolving at sunrise? He reached the building, climbed the stairs 2 at a time, and opened the door. And froze. She was still there. But not just there. Transformed. The mattress was neatly made. The dishes were clean. The floor had been swept. And Callie. Callie was sitting at the tiny table, a pan on the hot plate, stirring something that smelled like tomato and garlic and hope. Hey, she said without turning. I found some pasta in the cabinet. Figured I'd make dinner. He blinked, stepping inside slowly, as if afraid he was hallucinating. You cooked. She glanced at him, over her shoulder. I can follow directions. Barely. He walked closer, his hands shoved into his pockets. You didn't have to do this. I know, she said softly. That's why I did. They ate in the dim light of a lamp with a broken shade, sitting across from each other like two people trying to read the same map from opposite ends. You really stayed all day? He asked between bites. Yeah. I needed the stillness. You're not used to that. She laughed, but it wasn't funny. In my house, silence usually meant someone was angry. Or planning something. Peace was performative. Jared leaned back in his chair. That's messed up. Yeah. But you don't see how weird it is until you leave it. She twirled her fork once, then looked up, her voice lower now. When I was a kid, I thought money fixed things. That once we had enough of it, no one would fight, no one would lie. But all it did was put a nicer frame around the same ugly picture. Jared didn't speak. He didn't need to. She wasn't telling him this for advice. She was exhaling. I used to dream about living in a small apartment, she continued, where the walls were thin and the neighbors yelled and you had to jiggle the toilet handle just right. I thought, maybe that kind of life meant something was real. He raised an eyebrow. You're romanticizing being broke. Maybe, she said. Or maybe I just wanted to stop pretending everything was perfect. He looked at her for a long time, not sure what to say. Then finally, it's not perfect here either. I can barely pay rent. The heater's older than me. And sometimes, I get scared I'll never get out of this place. Callie met his eyes. But you're free. The words hit like a low note on a piano. Deep, unexpected, echoing long after the sound faded. And in that moment, he saw her clearly, not as the rich girl hiding in his apartment, but as someone unraveling her whole identity in real time, piece by piece. Maybe she wasn't running away. Maybe she was running toward something. The city was loud again. By morning, the soft rhythm of peace they'd stumbled into began to splinter. Jared felt it before he opened his eyes. Something in the air had changed. Maybe it was the way the street noise climbed through the window, or the faint buzz of his phone charging on the floor beside him. But something was off. He sat up, blinking through sleep, and for a second, his heart dropped. Callie was gone. The mattress was empty, blanket folded neatly. The cup she always used was still on the table, half full. The jacket he'd lent her hung on the back of the chair. He stood fast, eyes scanning the room, chest tightening. Then, the bathroom door opened slowly. She stepped out in one of his old t-shirts, hair damp, face flushed from the heat of the water. "I didn't mean to scare you," she said, rubbing her arm. Jared exhaled hard and sat back on the mattress, laughing once, dry and relieved. "You didn't. I thought maybe." She nodded, understanding what he hadn't said. Maybe she'd decided it wasn't worth staying. Maybe she'd remembered who she was. But she hadn't left. "I needed to feel human again," she said. "That shower wasn't exactly 5-star, but it was the best thing I've felt in weeks." He smiled, still shaking his head a little. "You clean up all right." She rolled her eyes and smirked. "Don't flirt unless you mean it." "I don't flirt," he shot back. "I just tell the truth." It hung there for a second, too light to be serious, too real to be a joke. She looked down, smiling into her shoulder. "I was thinking," she said, pulling her knees up as she sat on the floor. "I need to get a job." Jared's brow lifted. "You ever had one before?" "No. My dad said work was for people who didn't think ahead." Jared scoffed. "Sounds like someone who's never touched a mop." She laughed, but it was thin. Her eyes clouded over just slightly. "Seriously though," she said, "I need to earn my own way. I don't want to keep using your space, your food, your life." "You're not using anything," Jared said. "You're surviving. That's different." "Still," she said, "I need to stand on my own, even if I have no clue where to start." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You start by being honest. With yourself." She looked at him then, gaze steady. "Then here's the truth," she said. "I'm scared. I've never been broke. I've never needed a paycheck. I don't know how to do this without someone behind me telling me what to do next." He nodded, slowly. "That's how you know it's real." They were quiet for a while, listening to the city stir outside. Horns, footsteps, the occasional shout. Life pulsing past their window. "I'll take you to the market later," Jared offered. "There's a diner 2 blocks down that's always short-staffed. They won't ask many questions." Callie raised an eyebrow. "You think they'd hire someone like me?" "I think you underestimate what you're capable of," he said. She looked away, but not before he saw the way her lips pressed tight, like she was trying to keep herself from crying again. Underscore 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 underscore. The diner was loud and cluttered, filled with the smell of grease and burnt coffee. Callie stood beside Jared at the counter, hands clasped tightly, eyes bouncing between the laminated menus and the cracked tile floor. The manager was a heavy-set woman named Dee with a voice like gravel and a stare that could shatter glass. She barely looked at Callie. "You ever waited tables?" "No," Callie said, too honest to fake it. "You afraid of rude people?" "No." "You good with your hands?" Callie blinked. "Excuse me." Dee pointed toward a tray of dishes. "Carrying. Balancing. You got steady hands." Callie nodded. Dee exhaled like she didn't have time to waste. "All right. You can start on Monday. Aprons are under the counter. Show up clean and on time, or don't show up at all." Just like that, it was done. Outside, Callie looked like she'd just stepped off a roller coaster. "I didn't think she'd say yes," she admitted. "That's because you're used to people measuring you by your last name," Jared said. People like Dee don't care about that. She turned to him slowly. You do though, don't you? You care who I used to be. He considered that. I care who you are now. Who you're becoming. Callie didn't answer right away. But her expression shifted, like someone who'd finally taken a deep breath after holding it too long. That night, they shared the last of the noodles in silence, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. A new rhythm was forming. Not perfect. Not easy. But real. Jared didn't know what was happening between them, not exactly. But he knew this, something about her made him feel seen. Not just looked at, but known. And he was starting to realize. She wasn't the only one changing. The shift started before sunrise. Callie stood behind the diner counter, apron crooked, hair pulled into a loose bun, hands trembling just enough to make her question everything. The smell of bacon and burnt toast clung to her clothes like second skin. She hadn't even touched a tray yet, and already she felt like the air was heavier here, thicker, more real. Order up, sweetheart. Dee barked from behind the grill, slapping a plate onto the pass-through window with a thud. Table 4. Callie flinched, nodded, and reached for it with both hands. The plate was hot. Her fingers burned, but she didn't complain. Table 4 was an older man with tired eyes and a book he hadn't turned a page of since she'd walked over. He didn't smile when she placed the plate in front of him, didn't even say thank you. Just grunted. Still, she smiled anyway. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't comfortable. But it was hers. By noon, she'd spilled a glass of orange juice, gotten cursed out by a woman who said her eggs were too runny, and accidentally rang up the wrong order on the till. Her feet ached. Her back throbbed. Her nerves were shot. But she hadn't quit. And when Jared walked in during her break, still in his work shirt, carrying 2 cheap coffees, her hands stopped shaking. He handed her one and sat beside her on the curb behind the building. The sun was out now, hot against their shoulders, but neither of them moved. You survived, he said. Barely. He grinned. You'll get better. I hope so. Or at least, less terrible. She took a sip of the bitter coffee and made a face. This stuff is awful. Welcome to the real world. They sat in silence, watching a bird pick at crumbs near the dumpster. I made $42 in tips, she said, pride barely hidden. That's more than I made today. She turned to him, something soft flickering in her voice. Thank you, for believing I could do this. He looked at her, the way someone looks at a person they don't know how to stop thinking about. You didn't need me to believe it. You just needed space to prove it to yourself. Her eyes didn't move from his. You ever feel like you were meant for something more, but you didn't know what? He nodded. All the time. And just like that, they weren't 2 strangers anymore. They were 2 people caught in the middle of their own stories, slowly realizing they might be writing a new one together. Neither said it aloud. But both of them felt it. Something was shifting, quietly, stubbornly, beautifully. And neither of them wanted to stop it. The day Callie's past came knocking, the sky was deceptively calm. A pale blue stretched wide above the city, innocent in its quiet, as if pretending it wasn't about to rip something wide open. Jared was stocking cans at the thrift store when he got the call. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. But something inside him, something buried deep and ancient, survival, maybe, told him to pick up. A man's voice. Polished. Controlled. This is Malcolm Prescott. I believe you've been harboring my daughter. The words didn't land, they detonated. Jared didn't speak for several seconds. He could feel his pulse climb into his throat. She's safe, he said finally. I imagine you think you're doing something noble. But this ends today. Click. Jared stood frozen, phone still at his ear long after the line went dead. Back at the apartment, Callie was folding clothes. Not hers. Jared's. She'd been doing that lately, quietly rearranging his life in small, tender ways. It felt like building something. Not just comfort but roots. When he walked in, she saw it instantly. Something in his eyes had cracked. "What is it?" she asked, standing. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, like he was memorizing everything about the moment. Her bare feet on the cold floor, the half-smile she wore, the way the sunlight hit her cheek. "Your father called me." She flinched, sharp and visible. Her arms dropped to her sides. "He knows where you are." She closed her eyes. For a moment, neither of them moved. "What did he say?" she whispered. "That he's coming." Silence swelled between them. A silence filled with 1,000 unsaid things. "I should have known it wouldn't last," she said softly. "He always gets what he wants." Jared stepped closer. "What do you want?" Her eyes snapped to his. "I don't know. I thought I wanted freedom. Then I met you. Now I just want a chance to decide." "You've got that chance," he said, steady. "But you have to take it. No one's gonna give it to you." Tears pricked the edges of her vision, but she didn't let them fall. "I don't want to go back to who I was." "You don't have to." She looked at him like he was offering something no one else ever had. A life on her terms. When Malcolm Prescott arrived, he didn't come alone. A black car. A second man in a suit. The kind of presence that sucked the warmth from the street. Callie stood beside Jared as they watched it pull up. She wasn't hiding. Not this time. Malcolm stepped out, looking every bit the corporate king, pressed gray suit, silver cufflinks, eyes like winter. He scanned the building like it was a disease. "Callista," he said, without emotion. "Get in the car." She didn't move. He looked at Jared like he was something stuck to the bottom of his shoe. "I'll deal with you later." "No," Callie said. Malcolm blinked. "What did you say?" "I said no." His jaw clenched. "This isn't up for discussion." But she was already stepping forward, heart racing, voice trembling, but loud enough to carry. "You always talked about protecting the family, about legacy, about appearances. But you never once asked me what I wanted. This is absurd." "No," she cut in. "What's absurd is thinking that love means control. That I'd be happy just being another asset on your balance sheet." Jared watched, breath caught somewhere in his chest. "I'm not going back," Callie finished. "Not with you. Not with anyone who only sees me as a transaction." Malcolm stared at her. Then, slowly, something shifted behind his eyes. Not softness, but resignation. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, seemed to realize he couldn't force this part of her to bend. Without another word, he turned, got into the car, and drove off. No promises. No threats. Just silence. That night, they sat on the fire escape, legs dangling into nothing, city lights blinking like quiet applause beneath them. "You okay?" Jared asked. Callie nodded, her head resting against his shoulder. "Yeah, I think I am. Where do you go from here?" She thought for a moment. "I keep working. Maybe take a class. Figure out what I'm actually good at. And after that?" She turned to look at him, face lit by the flicker of a neon sign across the street. "I stop running from myself." He smiled. "Sounds like a decent plan." She smiled too. Then, after a long pause, "I didn't expect you." He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I didn't expect to fall for someone with a space heater that hisses in its sleep." Jared laughed. "It does snore a little, doesn't it?" She nudged him, then grew quiet again. "I fell for you," she said softly, no trace of fear. "I don't know when exactly. Somewhere between the cheap noodles and the bad coffee. But it happened." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Yeah. It happened to me too." They didn't kiss. Not yet. They didn't have to. The closeness between them was already a kind of promise. Not the kind sealed by contracts or expectations, but by time, by truth, by choice. She was no longer a girl on the run. And he was no longer just a poor boy offering shelter. They were something else now. Something real. And the story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.